spontaneous and in some cases automatic exchange of information by member states with bilateral tax treaty partners. Finland, for example, exchanges financial account information bilaterally with all 66 of its treaty partners, as well as within the Savings Tax Directive and within the Nordic Agreement. So there are already procedures and certainly at least legal protections within those kinds of agreements for human rights and for ordre public. And the next step, of course, is to translate those legal protections into systemic protections and data protection within data systems. And that's where a good definition of assistance to those third countries who might come into this kind of deal will be absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Lewis. And finally, I give the floor to Mrs. Roswell, please.
Thank you. First, I just want to make some short comments in regard to the question raised on tax evasion and so on. It has to be clear that there are huge divergences existing among countries in the terms of tax law and practical implications. And there are also huge divergences among financial institutions in terms of tax planning. But it has to be emphasized that in the first place, it remains the individual or the corporation's responsibility to comply with tax laws. Governments are setting the local boundaries. Banks are under supervision from local supervisory authorities in every respect, and banks and other financial institutions who do not comply with their local law or EU law stand the risk of losing their licenses. So I would say, to conclude, it's not a task of the EBF to blame and shame or have any kind of supervisory authority over its members, but instead work as an interest organization. When it comes to the questions we had on costs and the projects and so on, I believe that, speaking from a personal experience, every bank has to set major projects with a lot of consultants involved, and I would say it's always the IT side which is the one that takes all the resources. Building new systems takes at least 6 months, and that's why we are saying now that we're getting closer to midsummer. We still don't have any answers, and we need to be compliant by New Year's Eve. So there's not that much time left. So that's the reality for the European banks. The systems are, of course, not built for searching for US indicia. They are not built that way. So this is something that has to be implemented. And of course, we also have to think about the compliance for the future. It's not just that we're going to be compliant now, but also we have to monitor the FATCA compliance for the years to come and hire extra staff in order to fulfill the promises we make by signing up to the FATCA agreements. All right. We also touched upon the EU approach and the one solution for Europe. This is something that the EBF was promoting in the very beginning of FATCA. We wanted one solution, one common solution for the European member states. This was rejected for one or another reason. We are concerned that different solutions now may lead to an unlevel playing field as regards financial institutions within Europe, but also in respect to countries outside Europe. And this is not something that benefits neither the financial institutions, of course, not the clients as well. So I think that covers it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Roswell. And finally, I will give the floor to Mrs. Kleva, the rapporteur, to make the final conclusions.
Yes, thank you very much. I will be really brief. First of all, I would like to apologize for coming a bit late, but I was waiting for a debate with Van Rompuy and Barroso exactly on tax evasion and tax fraud, because I wanted to express my disappointment with the agreement in the Council meeting last week. And it's a cross-border debate that is affecting FATCA as well. Is it just the first hearing that we are having in this committee? I'm sure there will be plenty of time to discuss it a bit further. But what I think is that FATCA definitely helped in catalyzing international efforts to promote automatic exchange of information at the OECD and G20 level. And without a doubt, it played a part in the latest internal negotiation between the European member states and the blocking of saving taxation directive. It is disappointing, and here I understand all the comments from Sophie in 't Veld, that our head of state and governments actually react quicker to political pressure and on tax scandals than on the real alarming clause of this huge amount of money going into the tax gap. But however, we turn this, we should be at least somehow positive to see some movement in the files that we have been for a long time overdue with implementation dates. I also believe that when a world superpower decides to implement a law aimed to prevent tax evasion through the use of offshore accounts, we are certainly following the right objectives. Now the devil is in many other cases, as in many other cases, in the details. And I'm very happy that today we managed to shed some further light and hear some further insight regarding those details. So allow me to thank all of our participants, especially the guests from US and from Paris, and for joining in this debate and clearing up some of the questions that are arising in the European Parliament and in the European public. In a sense, I guess that the call of our big 5 member states serves as a first call for this kind of European response, and the Commissioner Šemeta reaction to the letter has been very positive. He is saying that he can only support efforts to speed up and expand the scope of automatic exchange. I think many of us would agree with him. But we need to see the issue of reciprocity, that this was one of the main issues today as well. We need to see transparency, we need to see data protection, and we need to see our basic European rights of non-discrimination and equal treatment being protected, and on this we should not compromise. At this hearing, we didn't answer to all of the questions, but I think at least we start the debate that will be going on in the next months, and therefore I would like to thank everyone that took the floor today, and our overseas friends as well to clarify, and the European Commission to clarify all the open questions that will arise today but will arise in the future as well. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Kleva. Thank you very much indeed to all the panelists. Thank you also to the panelists who took the floor via video conference. And we end this point of the agenda, and we move on to the next item of the agenda, point 2, the consideration of amendments of the report by Madame Beres, key information documents for investment products. So I will directly give the floor to Madame Beres, s'il vous plaît.
Eine Frage zur Geschäftsordnung. Es war angekündigt.
Point of order. It was announced that this was to be dealt with jointly in the EMD and the PRIPSA regulation. Are we going to take them jointly or separately?
Stolojan demanded the floor and he left. Sorry for that.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Do you want to do
ich muss die Kollegin Beres bremsen, deshalb frage ich.
Oops.
Jedes Mal wir anfangen mit sein.
Well, we can start with his in that case, and then mine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now that the FATCA people have gone, we can move on to this item on the agenda. I would like to thank those who drafted the agenda. For once we're dealing with TRIPS before EMD, even though the two things are linked. And even though I hope that along with my colleague Bernard Langer, we can continue to move forward in parallel. Let me say to him that on the PRIP side I get the impression that in the Senator Park countries, as we call them in French, the PRIPS file is moving forward more quickly. We've got about half the compromises already. Chairman, there's too much background noise.
Bien. Non, mais ce n'était pas contre vous que je disais.
I wasn't blaming you. I was blaming the people in the room who were making the noise. Anyway, we have half of our compromises almost agreed. So I think that along with the shadow rapporteurs, most of whom are in the room, we can move on independently of the EMD timetable, and we can reach agreements in PRIPS, which will be a precedent, if you like, for anything that follows. We are looking at the amendments for a second time this afternoon in the full committee because the chairman felt that after the last exchange of views there wasn't enough time for all colleagues to speak and make their views known. So I'm happy not to repeat the whole debate that we've already had. We had this last time on the 24th of April. What I would like to do is to focus on individual points which members raised at that meeting. At that meeting, Madam Pitikainen, who is working with me on this, she is the shadow rapporteur for the EPP, asked for there to be consistency right down the line, and she was worried about the comparability of the various documents. When it comes to consistency, I think she raised the idea of a review clause. We've made proposals which move towards delegated acts in certain areas, and I think that is the way to extend the scope without awaiting the review. I've made an ambitious proposal which many colleagues now agree with, and there are two ways forward. Either we put it all into the text now, and the document itself will be done at level 2 through delegated acts, or in other ways to be negotiated for PRIPS, or we have a review clause. Well, I'm suggesting that we take the most ambitious approach, and we should extend the scope as far as possible, right from the beginning. Mrs. Matikainen was worried about the idea that we were putting a document in an annex which would be the responsibility of the distributor or the intermediary, and there might be confusion of responsibilities. But I think this point was clarified in the debate, because our proposal is to have two separate documents, one which would be the guide and the other which would be the annex with the relevant information that the distributor or the intermediary would supply at their own cost or based on tax on the product distributed. These are two separate documents, and I think the question of responsibility doesn't arise, or liability. Now, when you come to how this fits in with the prospectus, I think this is a point which has been clarified now. It's been clarified because the proposal is to incorporate the whole logic of the prospectus, and we would now immediately propose deleting the resume or summary of the prospectus. Everybody tells me that that's superfluous. What we want is a thorough analysis. What we want is a prospectus which would go integrally into the document. And it's not just to inform the consumer. If it's just to inform the consumer, a guide would be more clear, more simple, etc. There's one other problem, but we haven't discussed this yet between the shadows. That is the language, aligning the language. Mrs. Metikainen said that in PRIPS we should use the vocabulary or the terminology we used in the guide, the UCITS guide. But I prefer what the Commission proposed in its guide for PRIPS, so I would argue for keeping the Commission proposal, but we still have to discuss that. Sharon Bowles, our chair, was interested in the scope, and there again I think we have made progress, and the idea of having as broad a scope as possible so that we can adapt the guide to the objective of the product concerned is a good thing. But I've spoken to the Commissioner about this on several occasions, and he likes our approach. It's an approach which would not only make the life of the producer easier, the manufacturer that is, but it would also inform the investor, who is often just a saver when it comes to a retail product. And in that spirit as well, I wondered about savings accounts. The Commissioner, when it comes to savings accounts, has raised a topical question. Potentially this is a subject which could be dealt with in the proposals on access to a basic account. And I asked him about this. I asked him which way he wanted to go. And in view of the timetable of the state of play, he thinks it's more desirable to include it immediately in this proposal. So that's the position I will defend, and I hope I will get your support. In first the shadows and then the committee. Sharon Bowles also insisted that the guide is a comparative document. In my compromise amendments, I say we have to keep the two references: one, an information document, and two, a comparative document, a document for comparison. I think it has to be both. And my logic is that rather than speaking about financial education in abstract terms in schools or universities, I think that when we educate the consumer, this should be done by making this information document clear and straightforward. So it has to be easy to read when it talks about shares or bonds or savings accounts. And when we talk about the conditions for adopting the guide, Sharon Bowles suggested it should be done by a poll. That's our idea. Sven Giegold, who's gone, was worried about the conditions for including old age pensions, and we as shadow rapporteurs found an agreement which would allow us to exclude obligatory pension schemes but would include voluntary pension schemes, and I think that's the agreement we've reached. He had also insisted on the fact that a deposit is not without risk after the unfortunate Cyprus affair, and that is why we have to see how under certain circumstances the consumer can be informed about the existence of a guarantee or otherwise, and for the investment he makes. Said Kamal said that people don't read documents, Well, we can, as legislators, agree with that. Many consumers and investors we know don't read documents. So